World News Today, brought to you by Continental Radio and Television Corporation, makers of Admiral Radio, America's smart set. By shortwave broadcast, direct from important overseas stations, as well as the leading news centers of our own country, CBS correspondents are waiting to bring you a complete report from the world's political and battlefronts. But first, here's Doug Edwards.
Field dispatches from the Tunisian front report that American troops have occupied the town of Sened and are pushing on only 50 miles from the sea in the central sector. The Russians have scored new gains in their drive for Smolensk, and Moscow declares red lines are holding in the northern Donetsk. Adolf Hitler has made his first speech since last November, admitting that Germany is a war zone under Allied bombings. There's been widespread American air action in the Southwest Pacific. Now for our first report from overseas, Admiral Radio takes you to CBS Algiers, Winston Burdett reporting.
Off the Parisian coast yesterday, American P-38 Lightning fighters shot 11 enemy planes full out of the sky. All our fighters came home. The P-38s have been ringing up all sorts of records out there, and tonight 2 of the men who fly them are back here at headquarters, right in the studio, in fact, to tell how they'll work. They are Jack Avery of Houston, Texas, and Thomas White of Kelso, Washington. Jack, I hear you've bagged quite a few enemy planes since last November.
Well, I shot down 6, and Tom here has got 6 also.
They tell me that that's top score for this front. How do you like flying P-38?
It's the best fighter plane around here.
Why do you say that?
Lots of firepower and speed. And I like the idea of having full engines with me out there. I'm that much sure of getting home. I had to fly back to the Davies once with 268 holes in my plane and 1 engine gone.
Tom, how do you find that the P-38 stands up to the Messerschmitts and the new Fox Woods the Germans are flying?
The even fly circles around both of them.
Up to a certain height, anyway. And I know they're a lot faster, because once 3 Foxholes are stationed halfway here through the grid, but they never really got near. The only time the Messerschmitt can beat us on speed is when it's a little early down. And that's when you've got to be careful. So what do you do then? Well, there's only one thing to do. You whip around and link them with all of your guns wide open. And most of our work now is escorting bombers, so we don't go around looking for trouble. We wait until a Jar's attacked, and then we fire them in. Jack, as one of the 2 top scorers on the Tunisian front, what do you think of German pilots?
Sometimes I think they're either very inexperienced or they've got a lot of guts. They're definitely good. And my impression is that the general run of German pilots has been getting better since we got here. But the point is this, we've been learning a lot too. Most pilots are better today than they were when we started. The Germans have put their best men and their best stuff against us. Right now, it's our side that's setting the pace.
Thanks a lot, Jack, and Tom. This is Winston Burdett in North Africa, returning you to CBS in New York.
The growing power of the Allied forces all along the Tunisian front is underlined in a message from the British Eighth Army's General Montgomery to General Eisenhower. Montgomery said his men look forward to joining forces with the Americans very shortly, and after that, said Montgomery, we will finish off the business very quickly between us. More news in just a moment, but first, here's Warren Sweeney with a word from Admiral Radio.
What are we of the United Nations fighting for? The Atlantic Charter has summarized our objectives in 4 freedoms. Freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from fear, freedom from want. Not for worldly profit nor territorial gain, but for such simple ideals as these have the American people, American industry, and the might of our armed forces joined hands to wage a relentless war. To this end and no other have we put on record our firm determination of fighting until the Axis surrenders unconditionally. American industry, of which Admiral Radio is typical, has willingly relinquished the privileges and profits of normal production to help build the tools of war. In peacetime, the world's largest manufacturer of radio phonograph combinations with automatic record changers, today, Admiral is busy turning out radio and electronic equipment for our armed forces, working at the full capacity of both great Admiral plants to hasten the day when victory will make the 4 freedoms a practical reality. Now, here once again is Doug Edwards.
In Russia, the Germans heralded the advent of spring today by hurling fresh reserves of armor and men against Red Army defenses on the northern Donetsk, and the midday communique said that Soviet troops were engaged there in fierce defensive battles, but the Russian offensive on the Central Front retained its momentum. For a direct report on these developments, Admiral Radio takes you now to CBS Moscow. Bill Downs reporting.
There probably will not be any official Russian reaction to Adolf Hitler's Memorial Day speech in Berlin. Foreign correspondents listening to the speech here in Moscow this afternoon checked each other's impressions of the speech and came to the conclusion that Hitler's words were so barren that it's hard to get any kind of reaction at all, except, of course, the standard feeling of disgust. Another army is on the march in Russia today under special orders from the Kremlin. This army is composed of Russia's farmers who are preparing to dig in for the most desperate battle for food that the Soviet Union's collective and state farm system has ever faced. As it is in America, this year's crops probably rank as the most important harvest the world's farmers have had to produce, especially as this true of Russia. Russia has substantially the same problems facing her wartime agricultural industry as America, only many times more so. There's a labor shortage. There is a problem of transport. There is a difficulty of rationing and delivering fuel for tractors and seed for the larger farms. From the wording of a special decree for the Soviet state plan of agricultural development, you can get some idea of the way Russia is tackling her farming problems. One section of the decree reads, "During the next 10 days, we shall organize brigades on the collective farms, diminish the number of farmers doing administrative or auxiliary work, organize the horses and machines, work out tractor and field brigades for the preliminary spring work, and arrange for a sharing of the work between tractors and horses of collective farms." The Soviet government has determined that the next winter will be as nutritive as possible. That is what is behind the note of urgency in the government agricultural decree. It concerns every phase of the collective farm life, from the organization of nurseries for the children of women who will work on the farms this summer to the construction of field garages for the repair of harvesters and tractors. This is Bill Downs returning you now to CBS in New York.
Major General Eaker, Chief of our Air Forces based in Britain, said in London today that very soon our planes will approach the number in the RAF. Back in this country is a flying fortress and its crew, which has seen action over France and Germany. For a direct report on this American heavy bomber, which is destined to play a big part in our air attacks, Admiral Radio takes you just outside of Washington to Bowling Field. Bill Slocum, Jr. reporting.
I'm sitting now in the middle of a flying fortress, and from the bombardier's goldfish bowl in the nose to the tail gunner's niche and back, there are 10 young Americans at their posts, the same posts they all occupied on many a sea of flak exploding over Germany. These youngsters would destroy a man's faith in the movies. None of them is beautiful, and certainly none of them is a grizzled old sergeant with a tongue of steel and a heart of gold. Every one of them is a dewy-eyed kid, and the grimy, dangerous job of blowing up Germans in Germany hasn't left any mark in their eyes or in their hearts. These youngsters have just returned from the European theater, and in a minute they're going to give us a picture of life inside a flying fortress on a bombing run. But before they do, I'd like to run through their names and their hometowns. Captain Bill Crum of Scarsdale, New York, is the pilot. Lieutenant Mark Gilman, Santa Ana, California, is his co-pilot. Lieutenant William Lazier, Clymer, Pennsylvania, navigator, and Lieutenant Robert Clela of Philadelphia, bombardier. The crew, all sergeants of one grade or another, consists of Carl Masters, Paola, Kansas, Rufus Youngblood, Atlanta, Georgia, Peter DuBois, Arbutus, Maryland, James O'Donnell, Camden, New Jersey, Andrew Markle, Rosendale, New York, and Glenn Wilson of Minneapolis. Most of them have been over Europe 11 times. 2 of the crew are still there. Sergeant Charles Wright of Rochester, Minneapolis, is getting over a slight wound, and Sergeant Harvey McNally of Attleboro, Massachusetts, couldn't return because of a minor stomach ailment. These boys participated in the first All-American daylight raid over Germany, and they'll reenact that pleasant chore for us today. Each one wears a throat microphone connected to an intercommunication system, and each wears a mask because of the high altitude these fortresses work. They left England early in the morning, and it's now almost noon, and Wilhelmshaven can't be far away. This plane was the first in an element of 3 bombers, and in all there were some 80 planes on the mission. All bombers, no fighter escort at all. Let's pick up Captain Krim and the crew on the intercommunication system.
Keep on the ball, fellas back there. Keep a constant shadow. Don't let those LEs sneak in on you. Remember what happens when you don't see them. There's the one that hurts.
Here they come. 3 enemy missiles, 1,200 yards out. 7 o'clock upper. Here they come, breaking under. 2 more, 5 o'clock upper. Watch them, O'Donnell. They're in under Marco now. Watch them break away at 9 o'clock.
What's the left range so I can get a shot?
Up on the sun, 9 o'clock high. Can't see them. Youngblood, watch that sun.
Here they come, off the left wing. Nice score. That other fight turned them away.
Any flak coming up, tail gunner?
Flak coming up behind and low, 2,000 yards behind. Getting closer, closer. Whoops! Up with us now. Little to the right, but too close for comfort.
Just about ready to turn over the initial point. Be ready to open the bomb bays, Bob. We'll be turning in about 30 seconds, Crumb.
Keep watching. A couple of minutes out of the target now. Remember, interphone communications silence for all except the navigator and the bombardier. They have to pick up that target.
Bomb bay doors open.
Roger.
See that inlet, Bob? That one just ahead. The one curving over to the left. See those 2 large buildings? Right to the left of that is a target. See it, Bob? Yeah, there it is, the Wilmshaven Docks.
I see the building. Right to the left of them. Just a minute. Yes, I see it now. Right, I got it. Just a second, Crumb. On course. Follow the PDI.
We're on the run, gentlemen. Are they getting to us with that attack? Yeah, the black person out there to the right. Mighty heavy and getting closer. Their altitude's right with us. They're off in deflection, though. A lot of pursuit. They're waiting out there, outside the black belt. Be ready for them, gunners. Keep on your toes.
Getting closer, Crumb. A few more seconds now. That's mine. Hold her steady. Steady. There they go. Bombs away. That, then, is a picture of life inside a flying fortress. 10 men on a dangerous mission, everyone knowing that he can lose the life of the other 9 if he makes a mistake. And you might have noticed there was a complete lack of that rear gunner to pilot, pilot to rear gunner, come in rear gunner nonsense. The boys say if they took that much time for formalities, they'd all be murdered, which will give you an idea of the teamwork that goes into one of these bombing missions. It certainly is a man's work, but nobody can do it but a boy. I return you now to CBS in New York and Doug Edwards.
Admiral Radio takes you to CBS Australia. George Murad reporting.
Hello, Cisco.
This is CBS in San Francisco calling Australia. Go ahead, Australia. We regret that we are unable to contact George Murad in Australia. We return you now to CBS in New York.
Here in our New York studio is Columbia's military analyst, Major George Fielding Elliott.
The great battle on the Russian front along the River Donets is now passing into its 3rd phase. From the German point of view, it may be described as a battle of stabilization and disengagement. There can hardly be any thought in the minds of the German High Command that they can, in this area, effect the destruction of any considerable Russian force. Neither the terrain nor the conformation of the front could encourage them in such a view. Their purpose is rather to establish a strong, stabilized, defensive front from which they can disengage troops for other purposes. The first phase of this battle was the German counterattack between the Donets and the Dnieper. The purpose of this was, first of all, to save the German army in the Donets Basin from the encirclement and destruction threatened by the Russian thrust toward the bend of the Dnieper, which almost succeeded. The saving of the German army was accomplished when the key railway junctions were retaken and the Russians thrown back on Kharkov. But the Donetsk salient still remained unstable as long as Kharkov threatened its flank. Hence, the second phase was the recapture of Kharkov to act as a bastion for the German salient below the Donetsk. Now comes the third phase, which is apparently directed toward reestablishing the old German winter line north of Kharkov, looking toward the recapture of Kursk and the relief of Orel from its present dangerous semi-encirclement. The Germans are throwing more and more troops into the line and are reporting heavy fighting and considerable gains all along the upper Donets. But the Russian claims are still that the Russian lines in this area are holding firm.
In this country, the Navy has reported on new action in the Solomons, and there's an important announcement from the OPA. For details, Admiral Radio takes you now to CBS Washington, Lee White reporting.
In a brief Solomons communique half an hour ago, the Navy announced 2 more dive bombings of Vila and the 97th raid on Munda. Flying fortresses have also bombed the Japanese installations on Kahili, also in the Solomons. 26 of the 55 new Republican members of the House of Representatives today pledged their wholehearted support to the collective security resolution of the Ball Hatch Group in the Senate. The 26 members have just signed a letter in which they call upon the government to establish a national foreign policy and take the lead in organizing a United Nations program for establishing political and economic security after the war. As this program goes off the air, OPA will issue an order freezing the retail sale of butter, margarine, lard, and the other edible fats and oils to be rationed on March 29, a week from tomorrow. OPA says the suspension of sales is necessary because available stocks of these items aren't sufficient to satisfy heavy consumer buying in the last week before rationing begins. The freezing order goes into effect at 1 minute past midnight tomorrow morning. Only rationable fats and oils are affected. Meats and cheeses, except canned goods already frozen, will be freely sold on the open market until a minute past midnight, March 29, when point rationing goes into effect. This, as you know, is the first day of spring, the 4th spring of the Second World War. In the next few weeks, the frozen earth of Russia will be thawing out, and the Germans may be preparing for their 4th summer offensive. But Russia isn't the only theater of war in which the thaws of spring are important. The frozen earth of Alaska will soon be thawing too. Here in the studio this afternoon is Colonel William C. Henry, Chief Engineer of the Army Signal Corps. He's made 4 trips to Alaska in the past 8 months, and he'll be going back again very shortly. Can you tell us, Colonel Henry, about some of the things we're doing in Alaska?
One of my jobs is communications on the Alcan Highway. By last December, we'd built a pole line and strung telephone wires from Edmonton, Alberta, to Dawson Creek, British Columbia, a distance of 442 miles. By this October, we plan to have the line all the way to Fairbanks, Alaska, a total distance of 2,060 miles. It'll be a tough job, but I know we can do it. They said we couldn't get the line up even as far as Dawson Creek by last December 1st. But we did it in spite of the worst snowstorms in 40 years and temperatures that varied from 30 to 70 degrees below zero. The ground up there was frozen to a depth of 6 feet. We couldn't dig our post holes. We had to blast them out with dynamite. This spring, the problem's a little different. Part of the highway's built on frozen vegetation, or muskeg as they call it in Alaska. And when it thaws out, the highway will begin to slip, and the Corps of Engineers will have to shore it up and fill it in with logs and gravel. The Signal Corps has the same sort of a problem. We'll have to erect some of our poles in the form of tripods, 3-legged poles that can float on top of the bog in the summertime.
Why are telephones so important, Colonel? Can't you use radio up there?
We are using radio right now. We'd be lost without it. But there are all sorts of magnetic disturbances that far north. The northern lights, for example, which interfere with radio reception. And anyhow, we couldn't spare enough radio frequencies for all the uses to which telephones are being put. The Transportation Corps has established a series of rest camps or dispatch points, one every 100 miles, and they all have to be in constant communication. It's planned for truck drivers to drive 200 miles a day, 100 miles each way, and spend each night in the same rest camp. In the morning, they'll take a loaded truck 100 miles up the line and bring an empty one back in the evening. One of the errors in the operation of the Burma Road was that the same drivers would take a truck all the way from Rangoon to Kunming. He'd never get to know the road, and as a result, there was a high percentage of accidents.
How much stuff are we sending over our Burma Road to Alaska, Colonel?
The details, of course, are a military secret, but it's safe to say that several hundred trucks a day will soon be coming over the highway.
Do you look for any important military developments in Alaska this coming summer?
I think we'd better keep the Japanese guessing about our plans up there, but they'll have plenty of surprises coming soon.
Thank you, Colonel William C. Henry of the Army Signal Corps. Now back to CBS New York and Doug Edwards.
At 4 p.m. Eastern Wartime, Prime Minister Churchill will be heard over the Columbia Broadcasting System. His speech, following Hitler's talk this morning, is eagerly awaited in Britain. Admiral Radio takes you now to CBS London. John Daly reporting.
Hitler's speech of this afternoon is called peculiar here in London, and the impression is that it cannot but have a depressing effect on the German people. Hitler said practically nothing other than that German soldiers in Russia would soon get some leave. His figure of 542,000 Germans killed since the war started is considered so ridiculous that even the German people will see it as a palpable lie. Also, London noted the usual lack of bombast and martial music. Much more importance is attached here to the announcement made after Hitler spoke, the announcement that he was accompanied by Goering and the 3 German military commanders-in-chief. London considers this to mean that Hitler has given over command of the German armies to Keitel, and that Goering has had to give over command of the Luftwaffe to Milch. The general reaction among the British people to Hitler's speech was best described to me by one young English woman who has probably seen too much of Americans lately. Said she, "Oh, phooey." At 9 o'clock tonight, London time, as Doug Edwards has told you, Prime Minister Churchill will make his 15th broadcast of the war. Mr. Churchill is expected to talk for nearly an hour, and it's felt that he will give some direction to all the discussions on post-war planning that have developed in the last few weeks, at least as far as the British are concerned. CBS will broadcast the Prime Minister's address beginning at 4 p.m. Eastern Wartime. The Prime Minister today sent a message of congratulations to the U.S. commanders on the effectiveness of last Thursday's American daylight raid on the important Nazi U-boat center at Wagesack near Bremen. Young Americans in the RAF have made a great reputation for themselves as gallant companions in arms and as possessors of a large sense of humor. It is the tradition in the RAF that if a member is shot down over enemy territory, his belongings, saving only a few of the most intimate and personal things which go to his family, are split up among the rest of the squadron. One young American from California was recently shot down over France, and the tradition had its way. 2 weeks passed, and a card from a prisoner of war camp in Germany arrived at his squadron's base. It was addressed to the entire squadron, and all it said was, "You so-and-sos put my clothes back." We return you now to CBS New York and Doug Edwards.
And now here is a message from our sponsor.
We Americans are willing to make any sacrifice if we know that it will help win the war. As yet, these sacrifices haven't caused us any real hardship. For instance, it's almost impossible to buy a new radio, but your present set will last for the duration if you take one simple precaution. Have your Admiral dealer check it twice a year regularly. A simple precaution, yes, but not one to be neglected. For regular checkups give your Admiral dealer a chance to anticipate and stop trouble. If your Admiral dealer discovers some vital part will need replacement in the near future, he'll order one immediately and probably have it in time so you won't miss a single broadcast. This is a valuable service in these days of shortages, one rendered by all Admiral dealers, trained experts who have the backing of the Admiral organization. Call your Admiral dealer. Ask him to check your radio twice a year regularly. You'll be glad you did. Uncle Sam is appealing to American women for aid, real practical aid. He needs 5 million more women in war jobs by the end of 1943. He'll train applicants free, place them at no cost at work that pays well. Any job, either in a war plant or in an industry producing the essentials of civilian life, is a war job. Your being in such work does not affect the draft status of your husband in any way. So please, visit your local office of the United States Employment Service at once and find the job you can do that will help win the war. World News Today is brought to you each Sunday at this hour by Continental Radio and Television Corporation, makers of Admiral Radio, America's smart set. Be sure to listen again next Sunday when Admiral brings you World News Today by shortwave, direct from the leading news centers of the world. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
WBBM, Chicago.